Hi everyone and welcome along to another episode on the LOPSided Podcast. Today, I'm joined by John Croft. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm very well, very well.
Good.
Now, I'm really looking forward to this.
Okay.
So, don't be too
No
nervous.
pressure.
No pressure. So we're here to speak about elevating operations, implementing change with real business impact. And I mean, there's probably no one more experienced to talk to us about this than you, given your background. Do you want to give us a quick kind of tweet length overview of that?
Yes, I've basically spent my whole career working with lawyers. We've started off helping out with the sort of more the back office side in the early days, and the bright line back then was kind of anything except what the lawyers do. And then I suppose around 2005, 2006, probably about the time that kind of e-discovery was invented, the world started going digital, and with such an exponential rise in the amount of sort of data that was around, all of a sudden just throwing bodies at problems became, even if you had all the money in the world, you might not have all the time or all the people. And so we started looking initially in litigation at things like doc review and e-discovery. And then really over the last 25 years, we have looked at more and more and more areas of sort of what I call kind of routine corporate legal work, fully understanding that there's always going to be some kind of work, I think, that you put that needs to stay in-house. If your business is something like an airline, for instance, there's certain lawyers that need to have deep understanding of how airlines work and should work at British Airways or whatever it is, and that's fit for purpose and good. There's always kind of the black swan moments, and an IPO or a takeover or a big piece of litigation where you absolutely need to bring in law firms, and I think it's fine to pay by the hour for the kind of expertise that someone can give you. And there is a third bucket of work, which is the one that we identified as every bit as important, but you don't need to work at the airline, and most firms are not really sort of set up and probably don't want to do that type of work. And it's the kind of routine legal work on a Tuesday morning that just needs to be done efficiently. And I suppose in short, we realized in the early days that everyone that was trying to solve for that third bucket of work had normally grown up in private practice at a law firm, had worked in-house, and so knew how those two business models work. But they are a different business model to what we now call a law company, which is the sort of third part. And really what we've done over the last 25 years is build actually two businesses, but the business I'm in at the moment, where we offer all of the various services that sit in that suite. And we work with law departments, but we also work with law firms as well. And our thinking is that if we can offer something that is efficient, cost effective and works, then it's just out there in the market, and we don't mind which side of the fence you are on when you choose to work.
Amazing. And tell me a bit more about Elevate. I mean, and I'll throw some figures around, but roughly kind of 150 million a year turnover of a business. I've obviously experienced and worked with Elevate a multitude of law firms myself, so I know quite a bit about what you do. What would you say is that thing that separates Elevate from the saturated and quite crowded market it works with?
I think that the main thing that we've tried to do to differentiate ourselves is what I was just talking about, which is build a business that has got everything that you need in one space. Because if you break kind of law company work down, it falls into kind of legal consulting, and there's lots of legal consulting businesses, legal technology, and there's lots of legal technology businesses, flexible lawyering, lots of those, contracts, CLM businesses, e-discovery, there's lots of businesses that have focused and do perfectly good jobs at one of those things. Where we've tried to differentiate ourselves is that we know that kind of life as a lawyer and as sort of senior lawyer in either in-house GC or in private practice, a kind of head of practice group, or further up in the kind of more enterprise level at a COO level, is that I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today is how do you actually drive efficiency throughout an organization and not just have one person over here doing this thing a little bit more efficiently and one person over there. How do you actually drive what we call a sort of enterprise change? Mm-hmm. And one of the ways that we feel that we can help that is by having all of those things in one place, because otherwise, even if with very good intentions, you set out to crack all of these nuts, you're going to end up buying your flex from this person and your tech from this person and your contracts from this person and your doc review from that person, and they're all different organizations and they don't talk to each other and the data's in different places. So our main kind of USP, if you like, is to be that sort of go-to law company. And if we can build good relationships with our customers and do good work and be easy and nice to deal with, then if they buy one thing, when they need the second and the third and the fourth thing, our hope is that they probably come to us rather than to go to anyone else.
So kind of the digital ecosystem in its entirety for like the cradle to grave of legal service delivery to a certain extent.
Well, that's a very good way of putting it, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Well, before we jump into kind of implementing change with real business impact, I wanted to touch on you a little bit and get to know a bit more about you. So who is your hero?
I came with two,
okay.
If that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
A sort of a personal one and a business one, just because they're kind of different. My personal one is David Bowie, who has been the most consistent musician in my life. I grew up, in the 70s and early 80s, and my first, well, I don't know if it was the first, but the first single I can remember buying, because I had it for a very long time, and it got scratched as they used to, and the middle used to pop out. I was just thinking about that walking over here.
The plastic bit,
the sort of like the Mercedes sign in the middle, and you had to
cylinder that
was Life on Mars. And then I was very lucky because my very last day of school, the day I did my last A level, was, I don't know, a Wednesday or Thursday or something, and on the Saturday night, we drove, a friend of mine had a car, and we drove to Milton Keynes, and we went to Milton Keynes Bowl, and we saw him perform the Serious Moonlight Tour. And it was 1983. It was the year that the Let's Dance album came out, and to date, that's the best concert I've ever been to in my life.
Amazing. And there's actually some correlation there around how adaptive he was, how
Completely.
he would reinvent himself
over and over again. I completely agree.
And staying current for decade upon decade. I mean, the reason I say that, my son, my oldest, had this weird obsession with David Bowie as a young child, and he would put Bowie songs onto Alexa, and he had a David Bowie t-shirt, and given the nature of the music and, just kind of who he was, and it's not something you directly reference to a young child. And it's just...
He was writing a show at the week he died, and I've subsequently found out that he was early writing an 18th century opera.
Wow.
Which just goes to show the kind of breadth and depth of the guy that he was. And
the credibility point that whatever it was he would be doing, someone would say, it's going to be good, it's Bowie. He just, to have that level of credibility to you.
Possible exception of Tim Machine, but yes. Anyway, so here's my personal one.
Okay.
And
it's a separate podcast, Bowie podcast, several podcasts.
To get too nerdy. My business hero has always been Richard Branson, and particularly with the kind of airline business. And I think that's because in Richard Branson, I see someone, a kind of an outsider that turned up in a very, very sort of blue blood establishment sector when British Airways was run by Lord King, and you were sort of lucky to fly for them, fly with them. And he turned up as the kind of, the outsider with new ideas of, I think there's better ways of doing, different and better ways of doing this. And of course was crushed out every step they tried to kind of keep him out. They blocked him all at Heathrow, so he couldn't get any slots there. So he had to go to Gatwick because they knew that would be disadvantageous. So he bought a fleet of brand new Range Rovers and said, I'm going to go and drive. No one had a car service, but the car services didn't exist in the UK, as you know, when we were younger, pre-Uber and things like that. I'll go and pick you up. And suddenly turned a disadvantage into a huge advantage. And suddenly everyone actually wanted to spend an hour in the car getting to the airport because it was kind of fun and part of the journey.
Yeah.
He's always been my business hero.
Definitely fascinating business story to go back and look at how he procured the first Boeing that he did, and he was actually selling the flight without being in ownership of the Boeing.
Oh, yeah.
He's just he's way ahead of his time.
All the things that you kind of need to do when you're a startup, which no one likes to admit to, but you've got to
dirty, gritty.
You've got to start somewhere, and it's that sort of vicious circle of customers and capabilities.
Well, two brilliant heroes, John. What's your greatest accomplishment?
I have 3 greatest accomplishments.
Okay, you're getting greedy now, John. That's 5 in total.
Sorry,
2 questions.
They're my children, and I know everyone loves their children, but the reason that I move them from kind of kids that I love to kind of hero status in my mind is because despite the fact that they all grew up in the same house, same rules, same time, and my wife and I don't think we ever sat down with any of them and talked about what they wanted to do in life. It just sort of evolved. But through that evolution, all 3 of them have become entrepreneurs and have their own businesses. And so none of them work for anyone else.
That's amazing.
That gives me great pride.
I mean,
and it's really, really difficult, as you know.
I mean, as a parent of 3, parenting goals, if I end up with one of my children has, a specialist product line in White Rabbit in Tesco, and then one's a successful actor, come singer, artist, and then the other one's doing brilliant work in a particular space as she is. I mean, you've got to feel like you couldn't have done much more, right?
I feel we've aced it in life. It's fantastic.
You're my parent goal now. Tick that off. All right, the most important question: which song would you sing on a team karaoke night out?
I'll tell you why, and then I'll tell you the song. We used to have, when the kids were growing up, we had this old Land Rover, and do you remember when we used to have CDs in the car?
Yeah.
And that was very new and very cool. And there was a box in the boot that you could stack the CDs. Do you remember that thing?
Yeah.
I was very proud that I got one of those, and then it sort of jammed, basically, and so we were stuck with the same CDs for about 5 years, I think. And one of the CDs, in fact, I think 3 of the 5 CDs were the best of Neil Diamond. So any long trip we went on, the whole Croft family always used to sing Neil Diamond, and so my go-to sort of banger in any situation is Sweet Caroline.
The national anthem, the unofficial national anthem in any event, right? So, I mean, let's get into it. Let's start with kind of setting the stage. So, getting your perspective on not just Elevate's overall philosophy regarding operational change, but yourself, been in business for 30 years or so in the industry, as I understand it. Yeah. So, what does operational excellence in a legal department or law firm truly mean today? And more specifically, what tangible metrics or outcomes define real business impact?
Well, we talk about running legal as a business.
Mm-hmm.
And that might sound really obvious because we're sitting here in a law firm, and a law firm is a business. But I think particularly on the law department side,
mm-hmm.
although it works just as well in the law firm, but I think in the law department side, if you're the in-house legal team, it's traditionally been very easy to sort of say, well, kind of, we are what we are, and we've got to do this work, and so I can't really tell you what it's going to cost because I don't know what we're going to need to do. And as the business grows, the costs grow,
mm-hmm.
and everyone wants their business to grow. But if your top line is kind of growing like that, I think the easy answer to your question of what kind of good operational excellence looks like is that ideally your costs should sort of grow like that. So real sort of excellence in operations means that you can increase your revenues faster than you increase your costs, basically. So there's a line that goes like, I realize this is a podcast and no one can see what I'm doing. Sorry.
We've got the video bit on YouTube as well. No, it's fine.
Yeah.
Kind of two linear lines at
two
worst.
linear lines, and the bottom one, which is your cost line, should start to sort of taper off.
Taper off at the end,
you can't, if otherwise, if all you need to do is just keep hiring people and paying them more, then that's not particularly efficient. It might get the job done, but it's not particularly efficient. So I think that examples of what metrics might look like there are obviously kind of your cost as a percentage of revenue, and that should either be kind of flat or start to taper off, or maybe kind of how long it takes you to get to a contract in sales. So if your sales team relies on legal for contracts, which they do, how quickly can we get to revenue? And if you can start reducing that time, then your company is going to start making that new revenue and that new profit quicker, and that's beneficial. So those are that's what we mean by kind of thinking of legal as part of the business rather than just a set of expert specialists who've got knowledge that nobody else has, which is important, and they do, and it needs to be a part of it, but it can't just kind of sit there on its own. And so obviously legal operations, which has been around for a long time now, has really been focused on making that part of the business as efficient as the operations or the sales or IT or finance or everyone else. That we all have similar goals.
And in terms of the kind of the catalyst for change, many organizations, they know they need to improve, but struggle to start. So in your experience, what is the single most common trigger or kind of burning platform that finally convinces a GC or a managing partner to commit to significant operational change and the associated discomfort and likely financial investment that it's required?
It's a very good question, because I cannot tell you how much of my life has been spent sitting in front of somebody with a proposal in front of them that is intellectually flawless, and it is absolutely going to do the work better, quicker, cheaper. Your clients are going to be happier, your team are going to be happier, and yet nobody does it. And so it does take some kind of a burning platform to kind of get people going. And I think there's a couple. There's the main one is we all love winning, and the main one is when somebody loses some work. If you're at a law firm and your client actually, and you've been doing things a certain way, and then a client turns up and says, actually, we're not going to use you for this matter, we're going to use this other firm. And when you ask why, they say, well, they're going to be using some technology, or they're going to be doing that work in India, or whatever the example of it might be. And normally that is the thing that brings that same person rushing back to say, actually, do you remember that thing we were talking about? Can we start having a go? So I think losing work is one. The opposite of that, I suppose, is the possibly the more positive one, which is firms and law departments who are aware that the world is changing and that they need to kind of keep up, or keep ahead rather than keep up, and want to kind of lead the pack and come to us and say, come on, kind of what's next? I know we're going to start losing work if we don't change. I want to be changing before we lose the work. And I think that probably most examples sort of that sort of bifurcation of either we want to do it before everyone else, or we were the last people to do it, is pretty much where everyone, there's not many people we talk to in the middle. And then I suppose that the final point might just be people, which is slightly less exciting, but just people come to us to say, I'm spending too much time doing this, and I want to do this. And the second part being the bit that excites me, the bit that gets my brain going, the bit that is valuable to my clients, the reason my client picks me. But in addition to doing that work, I've got to do all this other work, which is just kind of stuff. Could you help me? Could you help me find a way to do that? Because if I could just move that off my desk and know that it was done efficiently, I'm going to be happier. My clients are going to be happier. We're all going to make more money because I want to be focusing up here.
Mm. And interestingly, we kind of touch on the Elevate approach there in your answer, and keen to delve into that a little bit more. So, when you're approaching a new client, what is the first step that you'll take in terms of diagnosing their operational needs, and kind of that point of distinguishing between the symptoms and the cause? So, something being high costs as opposed to a cause being poor process, poor technology.
Yeah.
How would you go in and diagnose that as within Elevate?
There's a very old and very cliched expression, which is you can't manage what you can't or don't measure. And the reason it's old and cliched is it's true. And so kind of data is at the heart of absolutely everything. And my colleague, Steve Harmon, who you may know, interestingly, going back to my run legal as a business, he's our GC and our chief operating officer. So it's the same person, which is, we try and lead with what we talk about. One of his sort of favorite expressions is kind of core and context. So core work in his definition, and it's kind of old business school examples, but core is work that competitively advantages you over your competition. And that's the work that you should be doing. And then the context is this other work that is equally important and needs to be done right and on time and all of those things, but it is not a competitive differentiator. And so what we tend to do when we turn up at a customer for the first time is to look at some data around the work that they do and then kind of map it onto a matrix that looks at kind of risk and complexity. And quite often the people involved are surprised, even though it's them doing the work and they know what they do all day. Because if you imagine, I mean, in its simplest form, it will be a sort of a 2x2, but there will be work that is, important and core and a competitive advantage, and that's where you want them to be spending time. And then there's the other work that they don't need to spend that amount of time. And I think we then that gives them we have a sort of a maturity model, and we map how they're looking today against that maturity model, and then kind of come up with some steps. And it's not set the whole thing on fire and torch it all down and start again. It's kind of often little steps, and it's little early wins, because nobody likes change. Nobody likes someone coming in and telling them what to do. I know I wouldn't. So we try and find ways that are things that are advantageous to our customers. Find out the bit that they don't like doing, and would love it if that went off their desk, and start with that, and then that frees them up and their shoulders go down and they feel a little bit happier, and then we can kind of work through a program for everything else.
Interestingly, one of the best kind of books I've read focused on the if you can't manage it, you can't measure it. A guy called Trevor Foray, the Smarter Legal Model and Smarter Law. Really good read, and that stuck in my head as well. And I reference that quite often in terms of both ways. If you can't manage it, you can't measure it. But equally, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So just going to those basic points. And interesting, takes me on to my next question. So in your experience, what are the most common challenges that law firms encounter when they start to think about doing things differently?
As the question is about law firms rather than law departments, I would say probably the biggest challenge with any given firm is the fact that it's a firm. It's not a company. So it's a partnership. And I often notice on LinkedIn that lots of partners in their job title call themselves owner, which is obviously true. But on the basis that lots of people that work in corporations have share options and so are also an owner, but you wouldn't think you own, Meta if you worked at Meta, unless you were Mark Zuckerberg. So,
or if you had the £1,000 in shares of Meta.
well,
Yeah.
so the difference, as you know, is that with a partnership, there is less kind of command and control.
Yeah.
And as I've always worked in a company, I know from first-hand experience that even with the right structure, it is really, really difficult to get people to do everyone to kind of agree to go in the same direction and do things the same kind of way. So I think that that sort of partnership structure, and then you end up with individuals, whether they're an individual partner or an individual practice group, with the very best of intentions, having a go at doing it better over here, and then this other practice group having a go at doing it better, and it might be the same problem, but they're not talking to each other. So that kind of enterprise change that we've talked about a lot today is difficult to roll out anywhere, but it's even more difficult in a kind of a partnership where, to a certain extent, the partners do sort of own their part of the business, their book of the business, and then, I mean, you could go on and say that some firms have structures internally that are even more complicated, like these sort of Swiss vereins, where 3 people turn up with the same business card, but actually sometimes the firms actually can't even work together. So yes, I mean, there's all kinds of complexities, but I would say that that's probably the overarching. Otherwise, you go and talk to a GC and you can have a conversation and they can agree to do something, and it'll still be difficult, but you know that we will start the work and it kind of will happen. You can meet with a managing partner or a COO, you can have the same conversation, and they might want it to happen and I might want it to happen, but there's a few hundred other people that you need to bring along in that decision-making process. So that can be challenging.
So here's a bit of a curveball for you. Do you think, is change fatigue a real thing? Like, can law firms try to change too much too quickly, in your experience?
I think that I don't think that if you took the word law firm out of that question, I think it's a perfectly good question, because I think that the rate of change in society today, I mean, even outside of business, just everything that's going on, just maybe it's always felt like that. Maybe
I
my
think
parents,
it's definitely been
after
amplified.
the war, but felt a lot of change then, but it really has. Things happen so much faster, and it doesn't take years. It sometimes doesn't take months. It sometimes just takes weeks, and suddenly something pings up out of nowhere, and suddenly everyone's doing. I think the communication around the world means that we all know what everyone else is doing instantly every morning. In back to what we do, you wake up and look at LinkedIn, and the algorithm quickly picks out all of the people around the world that are in our legal ops kind of tribe, and within half an hour I could tell you kind of what everyone around the world, all our competitors, all our customers, all our everyone's kind of doing. So it can be exhausting, but it's, I don't know, it's also fun.
And we've also gone probably a good 20 minutes without mentioning AI, or generative AI, which is an achievement in itself. But I mean, that is definitely something that's supercharging the speed of change, is it not?
It is, yeah, absolutely. We actually bought our first AI business about 9 years ago. So I don't know if you remember LexPredict. So we've been kind of working with it for a long time. But you're right, sort of the world at large has just gone exponential in the last couple of years.
And another thing I wanted to touch on was the kind of culture of innovation, and cultivating that, that the true culture of innovation. So your background highlights a real focus on culture and diversity, which is fantastic. And how important do you think it is for a firm or even a department's internal culture for the successful, sustained adoption of new operating models? Like, how important is it to have that diversity in thought and people?
I think it's incredibly important. I think a culture, it's really easy to talk about change, and your last question about sort of fatigue and things like that. It's you can't kind of be the boss and just tell other people to change. There needs to be a culture where you're kind of down in the trenches with them, with your sleeves rolled up, actually doing it. I think it needs to be sort of visible and applauded, and you need to learn, or we all need to learn to keep applauding even when people make mistakes if they're trying to change. And so I think transparency as a culture is incredibly important. Elevate is one of the most almost terrifyingly transparent places you could work. I mean, with the exception of something like an acquisition where you obviously have to keep that confidential. Everything else that we do sort of as a business it's completely sort of transparent. People's kind of jobs, and we have a sort of an online thing called 15.5 where on every Friday afternoon we kind of do a quick kind of this is what I've done this week and this is what I'm struggling with, and you can kind of tag other people, and the whole company can see everyone's from the CEO down to anyone in the business. We all went away a few years ago and spent 3 days on a strategy document, and sort of boiled it down to a one-pager. And a couple of days later, one of our independent board directors phoned me up and said, "Oh, has there been some kind of a leak?" And I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" He said, "This is terrible. I've just seen our strategy paper on the internet." And I was like, "Yeah, we posted it, and it's like well, why would you do that? That's what we're gonna." And it's like, well, why not? It's what we're trying to do. It's nothing secret. We tell our customers this is what we're trying to do, and we're trying to explain to 2,500 colleagues how we're going to do it, and if this will help them see. So if you've got no kind of secrets, it really does help kind of pull in the same direction. And then I suppose the other part of your question was around diversity. And personally, to me, I've found, as I said, I've worked with lawyers my whole life, and the sort of lack of diversity in the legal sector has always been kind of troubling to me. And I can understand that if there's an old firm that's been around for 100 years and it's mainly old, straight, white, privately educated men, I know why that's happened. And I also know it might be difficult to click your fingers and change that overnight. However, when we started Elevate, we were not a 100-year-old firm. We were, a few people all sitting down. And one of the things that we have sort of built into the foundations of the business was that diversity from day one. And we still have to work very, very hard to keep the mix of people we have in the business as diverse as it is. And the reason that we do that, beyond it being, my opinion, the moral and ethically right thing to do, is because it really helps in everything we're talking about. If you if you walk into a room, as I'm sure we both often do, and there's 20 people sitting around a table, and they all kind of look the same, and they're all wearing the same dark suit and a tie, and probably all went to the same school and the same university, they're probably all going to have roughly the same opinion on everything. And there might be a place that's fine, but certainly at Elevate, a lot of what we're doing is being kind of done this way for the first time. So there is no book of answers. There's no reason I should know what the answer is just because I happen to sit here. And we're trying to do things differently, find new ways of doing things. And so by throwing those questions around to all kinds of voices from different walks of life, from a socioeconomic background, from a geographical background, from a race orientation, every which way you like, you just get better answers. And that has been proven time and time again to be helpful for business as well as the right thing to do. So yes, it's something that we spend a lot of time thinking about and working on. And I'm very aware that in society today, there's there's a backlash against all of that, but that's not stopping us from continuing on our path.
Amazing. I've said it on a few podcasts, but I run teams with this one mantra, which is a famous Ken Blanchard quote that none of us is as smart as all of us.
Yeah.
And it sounds, very, very similar in that sense. But ultimately, the none of us being as smart of all of us only really works if all of us are different in, to the diversity in thought, the diversity in people, our experience, our expertise, our capabilities. Yeah. Otherwise, it's just group thinking in an echo chamber, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. And in terms of measuring and sustaining success, how do businesses ensure that the operational change that they implement isn't just a one-off success, but can become permanent and an integrated part of the business?
I guess this goes back to what I said a couple of minutes ago, which is that you could have somebody over here that looks at a business problem and comes up with a way of doing it, and somebody over here that does the same thing. So if you're going to truly succeed on an enterprise basis, you're basically building a machine. And if you build a machine, then there's going to be documentation. How do we do this work, and where does it get done, and how long it should take, and what are the processes that you follow? But it's actually written. This is very basic stuff, but it is the answer. It's actually written down on a piece of paper. It's not in my head and your head, and we both sort of know what we're doing because we're both good at our jobs. It's actually written down on a piece of paper, and then when the work starts, it is tracked somehow, and it needs to be tracked centrally somewhere. So on some kind of portal, not I've got an Excel spreadsheet and you've got a Word document and she's got something in a bottom drawer of a desk somewhere. It's got to be sort of central somewhere.
And transparent, right?
Transparent.
Yeah.
And then it's got to be looked at and reviewed and measured against whatever metric, whatever KPIs or SLAs we sort of agreed to. And that doesn't mean, and then it's got to be improved. And that is how a machine works. And it's very, very, as I say, it sounds very basic, but until you've got that, you're never going to get enterprise change pushed through an organization. And it doesn't mean that you just press a button and all of that happens on day one. It means that you've got to sort of you can start with one group and pilot it, and that's absolutely fine. But then kind of roll it out, talk about why you're doing it, talk about what you're expecting it to do. And if it doesn't do that, you can stop doing it. It's not, going back to that transparency, the ability to make mistakes and not be sort of fired or slapped for you've got to try things, and not everything works all the time. And knowing that you're working in a kind of a safe environment, in a safe space, and as long as it is a very important thing. So I think there's a couple of questions. You could, if somebody tells you, "Don't worry, we've got this sorted out." If you basically just say, "Oh, great, how many did we do last week, or could you just show me the report for last month?" And they can't, then you haven't got the system in place. It doesn't mean the report has to say we're brilliant at everything, but we've just started. It could say we're terrible at everything, but that's great because we can make a difference here.
Yeah.
But going back to measuring and managing, that's kind of how you start these things.
Yeah. So final couple of questions from me. I wanted to touch on the kind of future and some kind of final advice takeaways. The first one I wanted to touch on was, you see the market and even more broader than kind of big law, big four, you're working with all types of corporates in a multitude of jurisdictions. Looking ahead 3 to 5 years, I'd probably go more towards 3 years to our earlier point on the speed of evolution, and beyond the current buzzwords and what we're seeing. What is the most significant operational shift or technological innovation that you believe will fundamentally redefine legal service delivery?
We've come this far without mentioning AI, but I can't really answer that without putting AI in it.
It's a fair point.
So I don't know what the answer is, obviously, but I suspect the answer will be that if you look at where we are with AI today, bearing in mind what we just talked about, which is that everyone's in a very kind of a new, they're early stage users, and AI at the moment, like lots of legal tech, it can do a whole bunch of different things at the moment, and lots of companies and firms are using different bits of technology to do different bits of work, and that's exciting and new, and will make a difference. I suspect that the big difference in 3 to 5 years' time will be that instead of using all of these different tools to do little different things, there will be a sort of automated workflow that is doing all of those pieces of work, and that the humans, who will always be in the loop and part of the thing, are kind of supervising the technology doing the work rather than supervising other humans doing some parts of the work. I think that's the inevitable path, because at the moment, as I say, everyone's working on each of the component parts, but once all of those are working, it's how do you then run it straight through, and I think that'll be very interesting. It'll just be what's next. And going back to your comment about earlier, or your question earlier about change, and it sounds a little scary, and you can draw conclusions about risked jobs and things like that, but everyone has their version of that. I see my kids laughing when I tell them that when I was 22 and started my first job, there was no internet, there were no mobile phones. You used to have to write letters to each other and stick stamps on, and so if you look at the kind of change that we've seen in our careers, it's only going to get faster and faster, but it's exciting.
Yeah, I posted something similar on LinkedIn around this, and about my view of generative AI, and AI more broadly, kind of empowering humans as opposed to replacing them, and drew examples to accountants with the invention of an Excel spreadsheet,
Yes.
and secretaries with the invention of personal computers from typewriters, and even manual labor, the invention of power tools, and how they all enhanced the human ability to get things done and the speed in which it was done. Some people didn't really like that online, if I'm completely honest. They took an alternative view, but ultimately it's I think the world's in a constant transition at the moment, more than ever, and AI is a big part of that, which is a lovely segue into the final question I was going to ask you, which was around kind of advice for legal leaders. So, and I'm emphasizing the legal piece here, but Big Four as well as the the legal industry. If a leader is listening to this right now, maybe even feeling slightly overwhelmed by some of the points we've made, and the thought of a major operational overhaul, or not being able to service growing client demands, what is the single most pragmatic piece of advice that you would give to them to start elevating, excuse the pun, their operations today?
I would say I completely understand it. As with anything in life, if you look at something very big, it can seem overwhelming. And one of the challenges I have found working with lawyers over the last 30 something years of my career is that they are sort of trained and then paid to go for perfection and zero mistakes in anything. And so until they know what the actually perfect answer is, they don't want to even start. And counterintuitive as it might seem, my strong advice would be just have a go, start with something. It almost doesn't matter, if you've got a lot of things you're looking at, it's less important what it is. If you literally don't know where to start, there's plenty of us in the world that could come and help you think that through. That's what our business is. But I would say just start, because everything we've talked about today, all of the different sort of services that are available, all the different technologies that are available, are there's a lot out there, but you've just got to start, and I think waiting for some blinding light to kind of come and reveal what the perfect end state is going to look like is not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's a journey. We talk about continuous improvement. It isn't, whatever it is that you do today is not, you don't then just sort of sit back in your chair and go, okay, yeah, we innovated, or we improved, or we're efficient. It is a never ending cycle. And so you've just kind of got to jump on the treadmill and get started. And it's a little uncomfortable. It always is. But have a go with something, and then it's amazing what one thing leads to another. And that then helps push some of these cultural changes through that we're talking about. Once it's difficult to, all the things about transparency and safe spaces and the ability to make mistakes and learn from them, and do, we do something called after action assessments, A3s, on everything in our business, and even at Elevate, which I'd like to think of, as I say, as a sort of safe and transparent culture. When we launched these, so I don't know if everyone knows, after action assessment is kind of what anything that happened, whether it was a pitch or a project or or an implementation or anything, it's kind of what went well and what could we have done better. And it's meant to be blameless, and it's meant to be a learning experience. And you say all of that, and then we sort of posted them out on our portal and said, okay, everyone start using these. And we even sort of led by example by a few people doing it, and nobody took them up. And I don't know if I should say this on a podcast, but I might as well. It's kind of funny. Liam ended up basically having to bribe or pay people. He's like, why is nobody using these? And everyone said, well, because no one wants to say, well, I made a mistake. And it's like, but we're never going to learn if we don't make mistakes. No one's going to get fired. No, nobody believes you, though. So he basically ended up saying something like, the next 10 A3s, everyone's going to get like $500 or something like that. And suddenly people was like, oh, I'd like $500. Yeah. So they did an A3, and then the feedback was, oh, that was really good learning.
Quite cathartic as well, isn't it? Sometimes, right?
It is, because you could have a knot in your stomach about something, but you realise that everyone means well and tries well, and sometimes systems and processes that we thought were very well written have actually been the problem that tripped us up and didn't allow us to do that, or there's all kinds of things that come out of it. But none of that. So I say that in hopefully kind of transparent vulnerability, that a company that I've just been talking for half an hour about on transparency, everything, even we found it difficult to get people to do that. So going back to the leaders, you don't expect everyone to sort of change overnight, but that's why you've got to kind of start with something. And if you do start with something, and then take people through that change process, and people start to see, well, they had a go at that and it didn't quite work, but they weren't fired. They're still here. In fact, people think quite a lot of them, because they've kind of got their sleeves up and actually going back in again now to try and, that's maybe this thing that's been bothering me, I'd be sort of brave enough to have a look at. And that's kind of how the culture evolves.
And it's interesting. So I think an underlying point there is to kind of create a safe space where mistakes become learnings, right? And
yes,
to your point, it's not a culture where you win or you lose, you win or you learn.
And again, we work almost exclusively with lawyers, and so if you've been to law school and you've trained to be a lawyer, you have been trained to get things absolutely right, and that's why your clients are paying you, and that is true. So I'm not saying that lawyers doing the giving legal advice can kind of just have a go and hope, but I am saying that when we're talking about kind of legal operations and how we do things, nobody just masters something overnight. So you've got to give people an appropriate level. You obviously need guardrails around things, but an appropriate level of latitude to lean in and try, and then if you're doing the things we've talked about today, which is you're monitoring them and tracking them and reporting on them, and then over time you will start seeing the improvement come through, then all is well.
Amazing. John Croft.
Oh,
thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much. That was fun.
Thank you for watching the LOPSided Podcast with me, John O'Donoghue. Don't forget to follow us on TikTok, Instagram and LinkedIn at the LOPSided Podcast. Check out our website at www.thelopsidedpodcast.com, and most importantly, like us and subscribe to us here on YouTube.